Hey, before I begin, I just want to tell you of a discussion I had with a client the other day. I thought it was pretty funny. I said it's important to learn about investing. Maybe a good book or something. And she said to me, she said, Doug, I know which book is best for my finances. And I said, which one? She said, my father's checkbook. Yeah. Listen, people find all sorts of ways of managing money. One of the areas that we're going to talk about today in today's interview is how to save money on taxes. I just finished interviewing Marylouise Serrato and Glen Frost. These two are big players in American Citizens Abroad, ACA. ACA is an organization which is specifically designed to deal with issues that U.S. expats have. Now, I myself am a U.S. expat. I left the United States about 23 years ago and moved to Israel, but I'm still very closely tied to America. In fact, I'm an American investment advisor, so I'm very, very much involved there. One of the things that we talk about in today's interview is something called residence-based taxation. Glenn and Marylouise refer to it as RBT. Residence-based taxation kind of makes sense. It means that wherever you live, that's where you should pay taxes. Unfortunately, the IRS doesn't really see it that way. They think that RBT means that wherever you live, you should be paying taxes to America. Most other countries don't charge their citizen any tax if they leave that country, but America does. The ACA, the American Citizens Abroad, is making a big push right now in terms of tax reform to try to make the American Congress change the law a little bit. The problem that we all have as expats is we don't have a real representative. Well, that's what I thought, but you're going to hear in the conversation that I have with them that Marylouise and Glenn have a different view on this, and they actually think there are things that we can do that will help the situation. So that's one topic that we discussed. We also touched on the issue of FBARs. The FBAR is the Report of Foreign Bank Accounts. I hope any American living overseas knows, or any American actually at all, who has an account overseas, if at any point during the year you have $10,000 or more in a foreign account, you need to report that to the United States government using an FBAR form. It's not such a big deal to fill out the form, but if you don't do it, the fines are tremendous. If you didn't do it recently, make sure you speak with a professional tax advisor to make sure you get yourself in order, because you don't want to start paying these big fines. And it can be an innocent mistake. For example, let's say that you were buying a house in Israel. And you wired money over, and you wire over $400,000, sits in your bank account for a week, and then you're going to send that off to the seller of the house. So it's really just a pass-through. You're not saving the money in Israel. Well, as long as you had that money in a foreign bank account, you have to report it. This is a great interview. I really enjoyed talking with them. I hope you'll enjoy listening to it. If you have any questions or comments as a result of it, feel free to get in touch with me. You can reach me at my corporate website at profile-financial.com if you have any questions about investing when you live outside the United States, or if you just want to comment on the interview, check all of our interviews out at goldsteinongelt.com. I'm your host, Doug Goldstein. Enjoy the interview. Okay, I'm very excited to have back on Goldstein on Gelt show, Marylouise Serrato, and she's joined today by Glen Frost. Glen is a managing partner of Frost & Associates. He is a lawyer, a CPA, a CFP. He helps people with tax controversies. He's also on the board of American Citizens Abroad, which Marylouise is the executive director of. Marylouise, I want to dive right in because the big talk for people who are living outside the U.S. is kind of wondering, with this new potential tax reform, how is it going to help us?
Well, currently, there are no provisions that have been put through on the House version of the bill, although there are still many champions on the House side, in particular, Congressman Holding, who made a floor statement about continuing on with residence-based taxation efforts. ACA is working on the Senate side because there's still an opportunity for a floor amendment with RBT on the Senate side. So all sort of TBD remains to be seen. We're working and advocating up there on the Hill and hoping that when the Senate version comes out, that there will be a provision in there for residence-based taxation.
Well, apart from justice, why would we actually believe that anyone in Washington would really care about residence-based taxation? Because all it means is they would stop getting taxed from us.
Well, with the Congress clearly moving towards territorial for corporations and understanding that they have to come into the global norm, it would be out of step to do that for corporations, but to leave Americans overseas out of that equation. A great majority of Americans overseas are working in American businesses and multinationals. There's an added cost for business, obviously, to hire Americans overseas. RBT would definitely assist. It would take care of that additional cost. So there's a lot of good reasons, economic reasons. Also, it's a huge compliancy cost for Americans overseas. Many Americans are spending upwards of $2,000 per year simply to file their U.S. taxes when, as you well know, they are already filing a tax return in the jurisdiction that they're living in.
So again, that's the problem that you and I have, but it's not a problem that the Congress people have. So again, I'm just curious, what is it that would really incentivize them? And you mentioned, for example, that it seems reasonable that if they're talking about territorial taxation for corporations, so then the follow through should be for individuals as well. But the corporations have very, high paid lobbyists, and I don't think the ACA has as much money as those lobbyists do to put pressure on Congress. So how is it that one follows from the next?
Well, I wouldn't say that corporations don't have an interest in this subject. We issued a cosign letter early in this year, and we had several of the AmChams that work in the Middle East support and sign on to that letter. So there is definitely an interest on the corporate side, not only for territorial for corporate taxation, but also for the employees that are hired. I would also not say that Congress is only influenced by big name lobbyists. ACA definitely has the focus in key offices. We've been in to see members of the Joint Committee of Taxation. In fact, my partner today on the interview, Glen Frost, joined us for a meeting, the Senate Finance Committee, House Ways and Means. So there's a lot of good reasons for Congress to do things for the little people, community of Americans overseas. We're not small, but we are the little people. We are the average American. So there's a lot of good reasons, both on the business side and on, like you say, the fairness and justice side to do this.
Got it. Then let me turn to you. Let's say that the tax reform could actually make things a little bit better for Americans.
Yeah, and if I can elaborate on that a little bit, I think what I see is foreign-based companies that want to attract top talent from the United States. It's very difficult for U.S. citizens to go over, be working side by side with a citizen from another country and be subject to all the U.S. tax laws as well as that country's tax laws. I think that U.S. corporations, et cetera, their lobby would like this because obviously it allows them to attract U.S. talent in those jurisdictions.
Glenn, talk a little bit about how the tax reform could actually affect Americans overseas if, for example, the ACA requests would come to bear fruit. How would it affect us in terms of, let's say, the FBAR, or when we go into our local banks, they wouldn't make us sign W-9s, or they would actually let us do investing? Is there any possibility that would get better?
Yeah, obviously that's something that we're pushing. But with the residency-based taxation, obviously what we're pushing there is that U.S. citizens, non-residents could elect to be taxed on, only their U.S. source income. They wouldn't no longer be subject to worldwide income. This current proposal does not address FBAR. FBAR is under Title 31, Bank Secrecy Act. This current proposal is just discussing the actual tax side.
If I can add on to that, we have folded into our RBT proposal treatment of same country exemption for FATCA. So that would alleviate the American overseas from having to file an 8938 FATCA form, and would also alleviate the banks from having to report on that American citizen. And FBAR, again, is not being treated, as Glenn rightly pointed out. It falls under another section. It is also oftentimes in Congress considered the anti-terrorist funding and anti-money laundering tool. And we're just focusing really on the tax issue with our proposal.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me that the United States has invested so much money in trying to get other countries to comply, the banks in other countries themselves, with FATCA, that it would seem sort of funny that all of a sudden they would say, we've changed our mind. That would be a huge change, no?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would absolutely be weird to backtrack. What I think we're going to go towards is a higher reporting threshold. Currently, with the FBAR, it's accounts that exceed $10,000. You see with the Form 8938, with everything else, it's a much higher threshold. So it does alleviate some of the administrative burden. Also, kind of the rumor is that they're going to eventually completely phase out the FBAR form and do everything through FATCA, through the 8938 in the future. I doubt that they'll completely back away from FATCA.
If I could just add to that, I think what we're seeing, there's a worldwide push, obviously, to combat tax evasion. And FATCA has very much been sold as a tax evasion tool. Obviously, not a whole lot of consideration was given to Americans overseas who rightfully will need to have bank accounts and financial instruments outside of the United States, primarily because they themselves are living outside the United States. But we're in sort of a worldwide global push towards making sure that those who should be paying their taxes are paying taxes. We see this in Europe with the common reporting system. So we're entering, I think, into a phase where combating tax evasion is a big issue, not only for the U.S., but for a lot of worldwide governments. And so we don't see that going away in the future.
Marylouise, in the last few seconds, we're just about out of time now, but for the listeners of the show who are overseas, who actually do want to see some change in the way they're dealing with American taxation, what would you recommend people do today?
Our recommendation is, number one, always contact your representatives in Congress. Even if you have not lived in the United States for a very long time, the last address where you lived is your address for voting registration purposes, and the person who is in that district and the senators of that state are your representatives. So we encourage everyone to write their representatives. Don't send a form letter. A lot of people come to us and say, do you have a standard form letters? Those don't get a lot of attention. Write personally about your experience. And number two, join ACA. Make yourself familiar with ACA and our advocacy work, because we are here in Washington, D.C. We have a team along with Glenn, who's with me today. We also have our legal counsel, Charles Bruce, who's in Washington, D.C., and we're available to the Congress. We're here 24/7, and community support for ACA is the next best thing to do outside of writing your representative.
All right. What's the website so people can find that?
The website is americansabroad.org.
Okay. We will put that at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com. And Glenn, just tell us, for people who want to learn more about what you're doing, I understand that you are actually helping people who deal with tax controversy. So how can they get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So they can contact me. They can visit the website at www.frosttaxlaw.com.
We will put a link to that as well at the show notes of goldsteinongelt.com. Marylouise Serrato and Glen Frost, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Check out all of Doug's money ideas at goldsteinongelt.com. Doug specializes in helping people who live outside the United States handle their U.S. investment accounts. If you have a question that you would like answered on the air or off, contact Doug at his website or send him an email to doug@profile-financial.com.